Jeff, thanks very much for coming and joining us here on 50/50.
Thank you so much for having me, Simon.
Just give us an idea, from your personal experience, what impacts you've seen in Western Colorado from that, the long-term effects of fracking.
My personal experience with the long-term effects are only bolstered by the work that we did for the film that we've been producing with my team for the last year. And those effects are groundwater contamination and surface water contamination with chemicals called endocrine disruptors. These are chemicals that are present inside the shale or coal seam underground, but they're also present in the fracking chemicals. And now the Colorado School of Public Health and the University of Colorado have found these chemicals in the rivers, in the streams, and in the groundwater.
What was the reaction of the Botswana government when you showed them your documentary?
Well, at first they were a little hostile. I think it took them a little bit by surprise, and they admitted on national radio with the Minister of Mines, Water and Energy, who's all the same person, that actually they were not completely aware of all the different points of exploring for coal bed methane in the country, and that the accusations of fracking had come as a bit of a surprise. And at this point, it has raised the level of the national debate in the country. And the film itself has actually created a dialogue between civil society and some journalism in the country and the government to sort of say, well, maybe we could do these things in a place that isn't necessarily going to be so damaging to our environment.
What are the concerns that people in Botswana should have for fracking on their landscape?
There's huge impacts with this development. Some of those impacts really stretch out over a whole region. For instance, a drop in the local groundwater table by as much as 30 meters. And then, of course, all the issues around the transportation of hazardous chemicals, spills, groundwater contamination, air contamination. In Botswana, you have a desert country with 2 million people completely dependent upon groundwater. And what that means is that if any of that groundwater is polluted, those people will go from having a resource that is essentially free to one that has to be provided at a cost. So there's that issue of people's access to water, which is an acute problem in all of Southern Africa. And it is, I think, very dangerous for the government to provide support for an activity that could potentially disrupt groundwater supplies and that people and animals are really dependent upon. One of the largest income revenues in the country comes from actually the tourism trade in the country. And the tourism trade brings in $300 million in sustainable income every year. And most of it's driven out of the Chobe complex there, up where the elephants migrate into Zimbabwe. And it's the largest herd of elephants left in Africa. And these large drilling blocks that they've given over to the multinationals to come and do exploration drilling for gas lie right across that migration route. And our experience in the United States says that once drilling starts, it's very unlikely that it will have no impact. So what that impact will be needs to be very clearly studied before this drilling goes ahead.
I've noticed, I think in the last 6 months particularly, a lot of science coming out around fracking and highlighting usually the negative aspects of it. Are we now fairly certain of what the impacts on the environment from fracking are?
You would be surprised that in the whole world, our research team could only find 7 studies on the health impacts of hydraulic fracturing or gas development at all, which to us sounds like a little too few to really have a good understanding of what these things do to the people who live with this development. Even for us as journalists who've been working on this for a while, it is not easy to find this information. The information that's put out by the gas industry is wildly different from what's coming out of good peer-reviewed scientific studies. And unfortunately, that gas industry information was sometimes all that governments in Southern Africa had to go on. Some of these arguments that we're hearing today in South Africa were the same arguments that were put to us 15 years ago. And had we been forewarned and forearmed with information like is in the documentary we're producing, we probably would not have made the same mistakes that we have made up until now.
We've seen various first world countries come down either pro or anti-fracking in recent months. Which way do you think the South African government will be led?
Our experience in rural Western Colorado has shown that actually the political process needs to be protected from the money that comes in with these big multinationals. So it's really important for the government here to be cognizant of their role in actually protecting the environment and upholding the actual constitutional rights of the people, and watching out that these big multinationals aren't able to pollute the political process in the country.
Are we seeing this sort of prospecting happening within South Africa's borders as well?
We are. Right now, there's actual coal bed methane extraction processes going forward here. And the government seems to have gotten around the legal loophole around shale gas by making it all about coal bed methane in the north of the country, particularly in the Waterberg. And I've seen the test results from those holes, and those wells have been fracked here in South Africa already. Mm-hmm. And I've spoken to Americans who worked on fracking operations in coal bed methane in the Bella Bella area and north into the Waterberg.
Is any of this reasonably balanced by the huge economic benefit that we're going to get from a cheap source of natural gas?
Well, in my area of Western Colorado, where there has always been an economically depressed farming environment, much like the Karoo or the Kalahari, the people who suffered the most were the poor people in our community who were unable to move away when the situation became untenable for them to continue farming. And the scientists and the economists we've spoken to at places as dependable as the United States Department of Agriculture have said that this activity is incompatible with other activities, for instance, farming.
We currently get almost all our energy from coal, and an open-cast coal mine is just about the most destructive thing you can do to an environment.
I think that isn't true. The coal itself, where a coal mine happens, is relegated to a certain geographic area. Mm-hmm. So this idea that shale gas is somehow cleaner than coal forgets that this rolls out over an entire region. Hundreds and hundreds of square kilometers are impacted by this. And then, of course, the air quality issues as these wells leak, as we know from the University of Colorado studies. They're losing between 6 and 11% of all the gas that they're producing straight into the atmosphere. And it's important to remember in this coal versus natural gas debate that at a level of 3% of the gas escaping from your infrastructure for gas, it becomes dirtier for climate change than using coal in your coal-fired power station.
Jeff, thanks very much for joining us, and good luck with the documentary.
Thank you very much, Simon.